Ladies and gentlemen, the moment you feel the urge to explain yourself is the moment you've already given your power away. Because confidence doesn't beg to be understood, and purpose doesn't argue for permission. The truth is, the strongest people in the room are rarely the loudest. They're the ones who know exactly who they are and move without needing approval. If you've ever felt drained trying to justify your choices, your silence might be the upgrade you've been missing. Stay with me, because what happens when you stop explaining doesn't make you weaker, it makes you unstoppable. You rise the moment you stop explaining yourself, because explanation is often a substitute for certainty. When we are clear about why we do what we do, we feel no urgency to convince everyone else. The instinct to explain usually shows up when we doubt ourselves. We talk more when we trust ourselves less, and the world has taught us that if we just say it better, louder, or longer, people will finally understand us. But understanding was never the real goal, approval was. Think about how much energy is spent trying to be understood by people who are not listening. Not because they can't hear, but because they've already decided who you are. Every explanation you offer in that moment is not information, it's negotiation. You are asking permission to be who you already are. And the cost of that negotiation is clarity. The more you explain, the more your message bends to fit the comfort of others, until one day you barely recognize your own intention. The strongest leaders, the people we trust most, they don't rush to justify themselves, not because they are arrogant, but because they are anchored. They know what they believe and why they believe it. When your actions are aligned with your values, explanation becomes optional. People may not agree with you, but they will feel your consistency, and consistency builds trust faster than any perfectly worded argument ever could. There is a difference between communicating and explaining. Communication is offered with generosity. Explanation is offered with fear. Communication says, "This is what I stand for." Explanation says, "Please don't misunderstand me." One comes from purpose, the other from insecurity. When you stop explaining yourself, you are not becoming distant or cold. You are becoming intentional. You are choosing to let your actions speak before your anxiety does. Not everyone is meant to understand you. That's not a failure, it's a filter. The people who share your values won't need the extra words. They will recognize you in your behavior, in your decisions, in what you consistently choose even when it's uncomfortable. The rest may question you, label you, or walk away. And that's the moment growth begins, because progress rarely feels like applause at first. When you stop explaining yourself, you reclaim time, you reclaim focus, you reclaim the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your direction even when others don't see the map yet. You move faster because you're no longer dragging the weight of other people's expectations behind you. You stand taller because you're no longer shrinking to fit into explanations that were never required. The moment you stop explaining is the moment you start leading. Not through force, not through persuasion, but through example. And example doesn't ask to be understood immediately. It simply shows up, again and again, grounded in purpose, patient in belief, willing to let results do the talking while you keep moving forward, aligned with what you know to be true even when silence is the only response you choose to give. Silence, when chosen intentionally, becomes a strategy rather than a retreat. It creates space for observation, for learning, for strengthening your resolve. In that space, you begin to notice something important. People respond more to what you consistently do than to what you passionately say. Words can inspire for a moment, but patterns inspire belief, and belief is what moves people, even when they don't fully understand the path you're on. When you stop explaining yourself, you also stop living reactively. You no longer shape your choices around anticipated criticism. Instead, you act from a place of purpose, not pressure. This shift is subtle but powerful. It's the difference between waking up to prove something and waking up to build something. One is fueled by external noise, the other by internal clarity. And clarity has a way of simplifying decisions that once felt overwhelming. There will be moments when silence feels uncomfortable, when you want to jump in, correct the narrative, defend your intentions. That discomfort is not a sign you're doing something wrong, it's a sign you're breaking an old habit. The habit of equating explanation with worth, the habit of believing that if people don't understand you, you must be failing. In reality, growth often looks like being misunderstood for a while. As you continue forward without constant explanation, you begin to attract a different kind of attention. Not curiosity fueled by doubt, but respect rooted in consistency. People may still question you, but their questions change. They move from "why are you doing this" to "how did you make this work?" That shift happens not because you talked more, but because you stayed aligned long enough for results to appear. Stopping explanation doesn't mean abandoning empathy. It means choosing when empathy is necessary and when it's being used against you. You can still listen, still learn, still adjust, but you no longer feel obligated to justify every step of your journey. You trust that those who need to know will understand in time, and those who don't were never meant to walk the whole path with you. There is strength in letting people form their own opinions without interference. It frees you from micromanaging perception. It allows you to focus on impact rather than image, and over time, impact has a way of correcting misconceptions on its own. Not through argument, but through evidence. The more you practice this, the more you notice your confidence shifting from loud to steady. From performative to grounded, you speak when it matters, not when you're provoked. You respond with intention, not impulse. And that restraint becomes one of your greatest assets, because it signals self-trust. Eventually, you realize that explaining yourself was never the source of your power. Your power was always in your commitment to what you believe, even when it wasn't popular, even when it wasn't immediately rewarded. By choosing action over argument, purpose over permission, and consistency over constant clarification, you continue forward with a quiet momentum that doesn't seek validation, doesn't demand agreement, and doesn't slow down to convince anyone that the direction you're heading is worth following, because movement itself becomes the message. When people see progress, they don't ask for explanations, they ask for direction. They lean in not because you persuaded them, but because your steadiness signals something rare, conviction without chaos. That kind of conviction doesn't shout, it doesn't chase, it doesn't rush to be seen. It simply keeps going, and in doing so, it changes the atmosphere around it. You begin to notice that the need to explain was never about clarity alone. It was about control. Control over how others perceive you, how they judge your choices, how quickly they validate your decisions. When you let go of that control, you gain something far more valuable: freedom, freedom to adjust without defending yourself, freedom to evolve without announcing it, freedom to change your mind because growth required it, not because approval demanded it. In that freedom, courage grows, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet courage to stay true when no one is clapping yet. The courage to hold your course while others are still debating whether you deserve to be on it. This is where resilience is built. Not in moments of recognition, but in moments of restraint, in choosing not to react, in choosing not to explain, in choosing to let time and integrity work together. There will always be voices that want justification before they offer respect. They want guarantees before they offer trust, but leadership has never worked that way. Leadership moves first. It accepts uncertainty. It understands that vision often looks unreasonable until it becomes obvious. By the time it's obvious, explanations are irrelevant. As you continue forward, your relationship with criticism changes. You stop seeing it as something that needs to be answered immediately. Instead, you evaluate it. Is it aligned with your values? Is it coming from someone who understands your purpose? If not, you let it pass without resistance. Not out of indifference, but out of discipline, because reacting to every opinion is a distraction disguised as responsibility. You also begin to notice how much lighter progress feels without the burden of constant justification. Decisions come faster, energy is conserved, focus sharpens, you invest more in what matters and less in what merely makes noise. And in that focus, momentum compounds, small wins stack quietly, systems strengthen, confidence deepens, not because everything worked, but because you stayed aligned even when things didn't. This alignment becomes your anchor. When challenges arise, and they always do, you don't scramble for explanations. You return to your why. That clarity guides your next move without needing an audience. It reminds you that not every step requires consensus, and not every pause requires commentary. Over time, something shifts in how people engage with you. Conversations become more intentional. Expectations become clearer. Boundaries become respected, not because you demanded it, but because you modeled it. You showed, through restraint and consistency, that your time and energy are guided by purpose, not pressure. And in that space you create, where explanation is replaced by intention and reaction is replaced by resolve, you continue to move forward with a calm determination that doesn't need to announce itself, doesn't need to justify its pace, and doesn't need to slow down for those who are still waiting to be convinced while you are already building what you set out to create, even when the road ahead still feels unfinished and uncertain, because certainty is rarely available at the beginning. It reveals itself only after commitment has already been made. This is why explanation feels tempting in the early stages. It creates the illusion of safety. It feels like armor. But armor is heavy, and carrying it too long slows you down. Letting it go allows you to move with speed and adaptability, responding to reality instead of defending an idea of yourself. When you stop explaining, you start listening differently, not to every opinion, but to the signals that actually matter. You hear feedback without absorbing doubt. You separate noise from insight. This discernment doesn't come from intelligence alone. It comes from trust in your own direction. You no longer confuse volume with importance. You no longer mistake urgency for relevance. You become selective, and that selectiveness sharpens your impact. There is a moment when you realize that most explanations were never requested out of curiosity, but out of discomfort. Your clarity unsettled people who were still negotiating with their own choices. Your movement highlighted their hesitation. And rather than owning that feeling, they asked you to slow down, to justify, to make it make sense to them. When you recognize this, it becomes easier to release the need to accommodate it. You begin to understand that your responsibility is not to make others comfortable with your decisions, but to make sure your decisions are honest. Honest with your values, honest with your long-term vision, honest with the standard you've set for yourself. That honesty becomes your compass. It doesn't guarantee ease, but it guarantees alignment. And alignment sustains you when motivation fades. As alignment deepens, patience grows alongside it. You stop rushing outcomes just to prove a point. You allow things to take the time they require. You understand that lasting progress doesn't need dramatic announcements. It needs steady effort, repeated quietly, long after the initial excitement has passed. This patience is not passive. It is active restraint, a deliberate choice to trust the process you're building. People begin to sense this patience. It changes how they show up around you. Some feel inspired, others feel challenged, a few may feel threatened. And you let all of that exist without explanation, because your path is not a debate, it's a commitment. And commitments don't need consensus, they need consistency. With each step taken without justification, your confidence becomes less dependent on outcome and more rooted in intention. Wins no longer inflate you, setbacks no longer define you, both become information, not identity. You adjust, refine, and continue, guided by the same core belief that started you moving in the first place. This is where maturity shows itself, not in having all the answers, but in being comfortable moving forward without narrating every step. In allowing silence to carry weight. In trusting that those who are meant to understand will catch up when the evidence is undeniable, and those who aren't were never meant to be convinced in the first place. As you keep building, refining, and stepping forward with a sense of purpose that no longer asks for permission, no longer seeks reassurance, and no longer pauses to translate conviction into language when action already speaks with enough clarity to be felt long before it is fully understood.